Hello, 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 hello. It is Friday. What happens on a Friday? 8 p.m. UK time. It's the Gin and Tonic Show. It is the 8th of May, and we are talking about Islam. So, in other words, we are focusing on the ideology. We don't talk about Muslims here. We talk about the ideology. With me today is Rob Speakers. Hi, Rob. How are you doing?
Good evening, my good sir. As I said to you earlier, not feeling the best, so we'll see how we get on for the show. I think it's been a lot of hard work, which is not a bad thing, but I think it's all caught up with me. So could be better, but we'll see how we get on. Good evening to everybody who's listening.
You don't have your slaves doing your gardening for you, so you need to do it yourself. Ah, it's a shame,
I
eh?
know, I know. But hey, all I have to do is convert, right? And look for the relevant passages and see if I can find me a couple.
Hello, people in the chat. How are you? It's a segue, which because we have three ways of participating here. You can either come and watch us on Facebook or on YouTube, and you can write comments if you want to question, if you want to um, query, if you want to correct, if you want to just simply comment. You can do this in writing by going to YouTube or going to Facebook. You can come here on the panel with us, preferably if you're a Muslim, if you have something to contribute, or you can watch it later and then comment on there. And again, and I made a mental note before you come and sit down, go and look at the video of last week to see what happened. And again, I did not. Okay, this has not become a routine yet. And I feel so sorry because there's such nice stuff in there, especially when we have people going and leaving us poems and things like that. This is so wonderful. And normally Thunderous does this, and now he's not here either today. So I'm really doomed today because I didn't do all of my homework. So sorry. Okay, we focus on Islam, all right, because we know more about this than any other ideology, at least I do. I know a little bit about others, but Islam I know a little bit more. So that's why I address Islam, and that is what we critique. We don't attack, we don't in any way try and insult Muslims or anything. That's not what we are here for. We are here to discuss Islam. We are here to look at the ideas that we find in Islam. We are not shy to point out the positives. We do that, and we go and critique if there are bad ideas. We try and use facts, reality, reasoning, and categorically condemn any kind of abuse, oppression, misogyny, slavery, violence, all these things. Because I don't think that anyone should go and beat a woman in any context. And this brings us to the topic that we're going to have today, which is morality. Now, we embrace free speech here and free criticism. Feel free to criticize us. If we're doing anything wrong, it would be nice if you keep it factual and constructive. If not, we're just going to kick you. So we try and be decent humans, and we let the Quran speak. So I'm not a big fan, and I don't think Rob is either, or anybody here is a big fan of going and letting scholars sort of indoctrinate us, or that they have all the say, and we just go and pit one scholar against the other. Because we've seen when we look at the tafsirs, just the exegesis alone, the people, they differ. They contradict one another. They have totally different opinions what the Quran says. So there's no point in doing that. Let's do it ourselves. We're living in the 21st century. We can go and look at translations. We have a lot of people who studied ancient Arabic who have given us translations, and I think we should use them. So last thing is, don't go to Patreon, don't go to PayPal. What we do here is free. This is a hobby. This is not something that we do for a living. Is there anything, Rob, that you want to add?
Yeah, I was saying to Stops earlier on, we should start asking for people to donate. Our opponents, let's call it that, are not shy in the least to ask for donations at every moment they open their mouth. Donate, please donate here, help us with this, that, and the other thing. And it's like you're up against, people that have got thousands, if not tens of thousands of pounds, that are somewhat organized, Unfortunately for them, of course, what they're standing on in the foundation is like quicksand, which is not difficult to point out, but sometimes it's a challenge. So I said, hey, we should do that. And since Stops has got an Audi that was broken into at one point, we were saying, hey, we should do like, what's his name? Content of everything and donate to Stops' Repair the Audi Fund.
Yeah.
But another thing I want to say very much is thanks to Stops, you might see the new icon if you haven't seen it already. It's the red and the blue pill. And the reason I asked Stops to, well, I actually didn't ask him to do it. He very kindly just did it because we were chatting. And somebody asked me, what does atheism offer? And immediately my mind went to the Matrix, and I thought of Morpheus, and I thought, well, I don't have much hair, so I could be kind of like Morpheus, just a paler version. But I can only offer you the red pill. I can only offer you the truth. I can't offer you, feeling good and all that. If feeling good or having an emotionally attachment is what you require, then potentially atheism is not for you. But if critical thinking is for you, then the red pill is there. I can only offer you the truth. And the advantage of that, of course, is that you can let go of ancient ideas that you no longer need to hold on to and defend. That really aren't defendable. So thanks to Stops, and that's the icon we're using at the moment. So if you're a Muslim, then there it is. The offer is there. Can't offer you anything but the truth or what is likely to be true. And the red pill is available. And we're here to deliver that to the best of our ability.
But I have to contradict Rob on this one, because I made a video about this. What has atheism done for you today? Because I was challenged on that in a chat somewhere. And I was not thinking. I was not, quick on my feet. And I only realized later on that it's not just the truth. Because, yes, it is the truth, but the consequences of this are amazing. And I made an entire video on this to show what all the consequences are. Some of
Good, I'll have to watch that then.
When somebody, let me do this here. This is the consequence of what you get when you do this. So this was somebody who was not impressed by what I told them about the Quran. And I don't even understand. You are a stupid asshole, I think it's supposed to be, Punk.
Yeah.
Who, when compared, I think this is supposed to be, when compared to me, is...
Yeah, English might not be his first language, or if it is, he's in desperate need of spelling and comprehension training.
Yeah, but everything has a spelling checker today. Anyway, the point is, my views are not always appreciated. This is the point that I'm trying to make. I always think it's so funny. I think it's so hilarious when the people, like attack me personally. I actually get a kick out of this, all right? I think this is so funny when people do this.
Yeah, it's just for me, it demonstrates a low level of psychological development. When you don't have an argument, attack the person, the ad hominem type thing. It's low level. So as you say,
it is.
You can either be amused, I just kind of ignore it. I'm waiting for something substantial. And for somebody like that, that's very rare that you'll actually find anything like that. So you'll just hear a lot of hot air and ad hominems.
I think everybody's seen the Matrix movie. I think you will take the blue pill. I like this when he's sitting in the restaurant and he takes a bite and he says, ignorance is bliss, because he knows that it's ignorant. He knows that it's fake. He knows that it's the Matrix, but he prefers it. He prefers to have the wool pulled over his eyes, and as long as he can have the fake taste, he's happy. So he's happy with a fake universe. I'm not. And I think it speaks for Rob that he uses the red pill, that he's not either. So I also say, like, I'm really, rather have the truth than have the fake, whatever.
And it's also not a rational argument you can bring, right? You're bringing something that's emotional. I'd rather be, as the person said in the chat, the blue pill, or as that guy, I can't remember his name. It'll come to me. It starts with an S, isn't it? Slaver or Striker or somebody or other, whatever his name is. I'm sure somebody in the chat will remind us what his name was. But that was irrational, as you say. He knew it wasn't true, but he wanted it for the comfort's sake. And some, if not more than some, Muslims will take it for that reason, right? And you'll even hear them, tell us all about it from the rooftops, as if that's something to be cheered, right? Certainly not from a rationalist point of view. If you're appealing to emotions, fine. But don't bring that as an argument to say that Islam is true. All you can say is, hey, it gave me a good feeling and it stopped me do X, Y, and Z. Well, sure. But, that claim anybody else could make. So it's not a claim that I'm going to take seriously in your favor, other than to say, well, okay, it helped you. Well, so what? Anybody can say that about anything, right?
Okay, I have two items of news. One is that a man in Canada, of all places, was fired because he sent out a Twitter message, saying that he objected to the relaxation of the laws, which is now leading to the Muezzin being able to call to prayer in Canada. Now, I don't know if this is temporary due to Corona or whatever it is, I do not know. But for me, it is appalling that somebody is being fired for voicing his own private opinion, and he did not say anything hateful or inciting violence or anything towards people. He just said he objected to the azan, the call for prayer, to be broadcast in Canada in public. And I agree with him, but I don't expect to be fired because I am voicing my opinion that I don't think that this is a good thing. I heard now that in Germany, for example, they also allow this as a relaxation, I don't know, law, temporary law during Corona, that Muslims can hear their call to prayer or something, even if they're not allowed to go there. So I think this is really terrible, because this is like, I don't know why I always have this immediate association between Nazis, who are also totalitarian, who are also this and this and this. So there's a lot of parallels between communism, National Socialism, and Islam. And if I go and I say, okay, I'm allowing now the call for prayer, for me, this is like allowing the Nazi salute in public in Germany. And I think this is not good, because if Islam takes over the political side, then we have Sharia in the country. And come on, I treasure like gender equality. This is for me fundamental. And in Islam, you cannot have gender equality. It's impossible. I know that I told you last week that I'm now in a Facebook group, which is LMU, which is the Liberal Muslims United. And they propagate that they're doing everything for humanity. And they are saying, well, there is equality. But it's very difficult to bring this in the Quran, because what they are doing is they're not changing the actual contents. They're just changing words. So if they don't like gender segregation, they go and try and come about the equality by changing the word for woman. So Nisa is no longer woman, is now somebody who is dependent in a working relationship. But they don't realize that at the end of the day, if you look at other sentences in the Quran, that this will not work, because then it says you can have sex with them, you can marry them, you can do all sorts of, which doesn't work. So anyway, so it's very difficult to get this gender equality in Islam, if not impossible. But for me, it's
Yeah.
atrocious that somebody in Canada gets fired for this. This is the point.
Well, that's very quote unquote progressive, right? Justin Trudeau, etc., is like loving everybody and supposedly except those people who want to voice a dissenting opinion. Well, those people, of course, you can't do. But let's all have our free speech until you disagree with me, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of the extreme in this case. Hopefully, he sues and gets a huge payout, and the company is made to look ridiculous. Because it's probably illegal to do that in any case. As you say, he didn't do anything hateful. And if expressing your own opinion about something in a non-hateful way constitutes firing, then, you'd have to have a look. But hopefully, there's a tribunal. Although over there, as I understand, the tribunals, again, are very liberal on the other side of the coin. So it may be that, he's not successful, but he should be. That's an instant case of going to an employment tribunal, it would sound like.
All right, the second item is this one, where during Corona times, I mean, this is crazy. This is from an Indian newspaper, which says the Quran mentions coronavirus, and Allah has sent it to the world to see who survives. And this woman, a burqa clad woman, I mean, can you believe it? She makes the most amazing claims because they say that, where was it? Corona, a woman wearing a pink scarf. Quran has the mention of a disease named Corona. It doesn't. But people are saying this because they know that people don't know the Quran. And
Yeah.
nobody is going to go and check the contents of the Quran to see if it actually does mention the word Corona. They will believe it because, well, they're Muslims. They should know what their Quran says, don't they?
Yeah.
Well, they
Yeah.
don't.
It's a favorite tactic. Just make bold claims and hope that nobody goes to check it up. And if you say it's nowhere in the Quran or it's in the Quran and nobody can find it, then you could always make something up, right? Change a word, say, well, in Arabic it means this or it can mean that.
Yeah. And she says, we've always been strong and ready. Do you think you can scare us with Corona? Death can come any given time. Don't think of scaring us with this disease. It's not about scaring you, you stupid asshole. It is about protecting society. It is, I mean, people, I don't think people understand that if we relax this now, we have given in to like a barter where we are saying, okay, if we are okay with a couple of thousand deaths every day, we can relax some of the laws, some of the restrictions. But we need to appreciate that the more we relax the restrictions, the more we're going to see deaths. And we need to be aware of that. So we can't just say, well, it's only the one side. No, we have to see both sides. And I think a lot of people don't understand this.
Yeah, and of course, other Muslims will claim that she's just crazy, etc. Right? So you're cherry picking
But look how far this
extreme
goes.
lunacy.
We are not afraid of coronavirus because Allah has ensured that we Muslims are safe. Corona is no big deal. Remember, we've come across sentences in the Quran which say, well, if you recite these or if you eat this and this, you are safe from any kind of outside influence.
Of course, it's a
This is,
falsifiable claim, isn't it, Stops? All she has
well,
to
how
do
do you
is go to a
falsify it?
hospital.
Yeah, but do you think these people are going to go to somebody who has a known infection and allow them or him or her or whatever to cough into their mouth?
Well, that would test the claim, wouldn't it? But then
Well, I
again,
said to people,
testing and
I will give you
verification is.
polio. I will give you polio, and you just before you do that, you drink a couple or eat a couple of dates, and then you're good to go. Then I can give you polio, and you will not even feel this. So will you do the test? Because that is the claim. Do you trust Muhammad? Do you trust Allah? Do you trust the Quran? If yes, let's do the test. And funny enough, nobody does.
Amazing that, huh? Yeah.
Hello, Thunderous. Welcome to the Gin and Tonic Show.
Hi guys, sorry
Good
for my
evening.
tardiness again for the week. Good evening, everybody listening. Good evening to the panel, and I apologise to the panel for a second week running being late.
Good to
You'll
have
have
you
to
here,
get some
sir.
penalty.
You've got to drink your
I
Corona beer.
The good one, good one, good one. Hope everybody's okay, and I hope the audience is okay, and I hope those who are listening live are okay as well. So carry
So
on. Sorry,
Allah
don't let
is
me interrupt you in the conversation.
ageist. What is an ageist? Allah is ageist? Ageist?
Ageist. It's like being against people of a certain age. I think it's like being like sexist, but ageist is like, you are
Oh, okay.
biased
So the old
against a
people
particular
want to
age
die.
group.
Okay, I got it now. Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
I'm slow. Okay, and this is now the reason why I have this here, because this is now the limit. Thunderous, are you ready for this? This is
Go
a
on then.
woman wearing the headscarf, and she says Quran means corona. We knew that this would come. There are even more infectious diseases in the world. And what does more did you know about it? Okay. So this is the nonsense that you get from Muslim apologists who are so deluded, who are so engulfed in their own like nonsense that they actually believe this. And the thing is, they are seeing this as we are the victims because this is, I don't know if you know what's happening in India. They have the, what is this, the Citizen Amendment Act or something like this. So where they're saying, okay, you can get all sorts of benefits, social benefits, if you are not a Muslim. Because I don't know what the rationality is. Anyway, so they are protesting against this. And they are protesting against this as they keep their faces covered, which is one of the most hated things about Islam. So they're trying to get Islam to be more acceptable while, outwardly demonstrating that there is a reason to find this. This for me is so absolutely amazing. And then Quran means corona. God, it's so unbelievably stupid, really. It's yeah, I don't know.
Does
Amazing.
boggle the mind.
Okay, I need
The
to.
stupidity.
Sorry?
So I was saying the stupidity. I've just joined the conversation as I've done, so I've not listened to the show until I joined the conversation. So some Muslim lady is saying that the Quran means corona.
Yes.
Is this yet again another sort of like reinterpretation of what words mean? So now we have somebody
Yeah.
else in the Muslim world defining what words mean now.
Yeah. And
So
it is
we've got
correct.
Hamza
That's-
sources. So we've got Hamza sources and the others and the like saying one word can mean 10 things when you look at it using rhetorical devices. And now we've got other Muslims added into the equation. Well, actually, one word can mean 1,000 things now.
Well,
So the word
what they're
Quran
saying
means
is
corona.
we don't need to be afraid. We Muslims have known about this all along because Corona means Quran means Corona. And this is the funny
So,
thing.
well,
And they don't
maybe
even understand what they're talking about. They don't understand that the virus is just it's a species. It's a type of a virus which is the coronavirus. So it's a whole family of viruses which, because of their outward appearance, is like they're wearing a crown, which is why they are called corona. I think it's from Spanish. I think it was detected in Spain. So
stops.
this
Here's the
is why
thing
it's
as well.
called corona.
So, but the Muslim world and the rest of the world, by extension, suffer cancer more than corona. So, what's the Muslims' understanding of cancer then?
It's a test.
But so is cancer then, surely.
Well,
Yeah, of
everything's a
course.
test, right? Unfalsifiable claim. But
Yeah.
if the Quran means corona,
Well,
yes-
okay, but if it's a test, why are we?
go on then.
But if the Quran, if the corona is a test, then why are Muslims singling out corona as a test and not greater tragedies like cancer?
Because cancer does not sound like Quran.
But here's the thing where I would agree,
Well,
right?
you can if you.
I mean, I would-
It could sound like that with rhetorical devices and understanding the root word of what root words mean and understanding Islamic Arabic and the traditional pure Arabic, which was revealed to Muhammad from a tablet that was in heaven before he came to earth by the angel gibberish. So if you go through that route, you can get Quran and cancer and the etymology and the linguistics. You can make it happen, and obviously using phonic fallacy as well. So if you put it all together, this potpourri of Islamic understanding of what Arabic words mean, you can get cancer and Quran together quite easily. I've just done it now.
Well, I'll say that I would agree in one sense with this lady, right? That if corona and Quran are synonymous, and corona is a virus, then I think we could certainly extrapolate that Islam is a virus, just like the coronavirus, and it infects people, and it doesn't appear to have a cure until some critical thinking kicks in, and most people are not vaccinated, right? So in that sense, I would agree that the analogy does hold that I think Islam, the ideology, is a virus that is hard to vaccinate against once somebody's been infected. But the
That is
numbers
the
are
thing is,
encouraging.
But the thing is, though, 6 weeks ago, I think it was, one of my pseudonyms was coronavirus. So I've obviously said it before she said it, and I'm a kuffar, a non-believer, an apostate. So I've obviously realised this before she's realised it.
Yeah.
So would that mean I'm smarter than Muslim?
And
Sorry?
Doorknob Head, this is exactly what the voice I have in my head. Cancer in children? What's all that about? And I hear the Fry voice in my head saying the sentence. This is so good. Thank you for that. That is so brilliant.
And that we can cover under morality right later.
But she is a Muslim woman, and Muslim women only have half the intelligence of a man. So do other Muslim men agree with this Muslim woman? And if other Muslim men are agreeing with this Muslim woman, why are the men who are twice as smart as the woman accepting and enforcing and believing someone that's only half as smart as them?
Okay, and the point that I'm making at the moment, I'm not even going into this male female dichotomy. I'm saying to people, well, I don't know if you know Dr. Darrell Ray. He brought out a book a couple of years ago because we were in communication with each other. We were in competition, and because he was bringing out his book, I was bringing out my book, and then he did it through self-publishing or something like this, and I was going through the Amazon route. And then I pulled out because I had changed my mind about so many things that I couldn't really publish it anymore. So he and I were in contact a couple of times. And this is why I advertise his book wherever I can, because I was one of the first people, obviously, who bought it. And it's called The God Virus. And he is, I can't remember what, he's a clinical psychologist, I think he is. And so he knows this, and he shows in this book the parallels between a virus and how it affects the brain and how the God virus affects the brain. And it's really
So I've got a
fascinating
virus
to
in my
see.
brain then because I believe in God. So I've got a God virus in my brain because I believe in God. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And he shows how the God virus actually works inside the brain to tell your brain, yes, what you are believing is actually worth believing, and it is having, some sort of use in having this and comforting you and making it sound or making it look to you that you are correct. It's exactly like a virus that goes into the cells and tells the cells, listen, what you need to do for me is replicate. And this is exactly
What
what the
language
God virus
does that
does.
happen in? What language
Sorry?
does that happen in? What language does that happen in if it tells the cell? What language is that taking place in? This
RNA?
communication of telling the cell.
RNA.
Is it empirical science, this, or is this just someone's assumption?
No, this is how a virus works.
Who's the guy you're talking about there?
But what I'm trying to understand is you've just accepted and agreed on the show that I've got a virus in my head because I believe in God.
Correct.
So what is this? Explain the virus to me. Can you help me understand? Because you see,
No, I can't go and explain the whole book now. No.
You
You would
got
have to
pan- you
read the
got
book to
pan-
explain the whole thing. It takes
No,
a little
no,
bit longer
hold on a
than
minute.
just one sentence.
Yeah, but you've got a panelist. You've got a member on the panel who actually believes in God. It seems that every week now there's some kind of stab or throw or slap that you're throwing at somebody, at the audience.
No,
that
I'm
may-
not. Come on, don't be
Last
so
week-
sensitive now.
Last week you made the comment about people who believe in God don't appreciate the universe or the beauty of it. They don't, and that atheists have more of
I
a.
would never say that.
You said that
I
last
would-
week because Rob had to come in and step in. So
No,
what I'm
Thunder, I
thinking,
would
is
never
this
say
a God
that.
bashing show, or is this an Islamic bashing show? I don't know which one it is now.
I would never say that. I don't know why you are being so sensitive at the moment.
I'm not being sensitive. I'm just picking up on several weeks now. There seems to be one comment after the other. I mean, I came on the panel to look at Islam, but every now and again, now you've just accepted that on the air that I've got a virus in my head because I accept intelligent design as a reality.
Come on, it is inevitable that if we talk about Islam, we are going to generalize about religions now and again. I try not to.
Well,
But it
can
is
I?
a fact that we do have Christians and we do have Muslims, we do have Jews, do have Hindus and Sikhs and Rastafarians and so on and so on. So if there is a
But it
commonality
doesn't
and
bode
I
well for the
mention
audience.
this, then it is not against you personally.
No, but you're basically alienating the audience by those who are listening to the show, saying, "Well, if you believe in God and you're listening to the show, you've got a virus in your head." That doesn't look well for the show, does it?
If I'm making a comparison and I'm saying that I find it compelling that a virus works exactly the same way as religions work, this does not reflect badly on the show.
Perhaps you might want to look at the evidence as to why people may conclude, because the evidence for evolution and the evidence for intelligent design is exactly the same thing. So it comes down to interpretation, doesn't it?
I don't want to argue about evolution
Okay, let's
or
move on then.
intelligent design. What I want to do now is go and look at the Quran. Is that okay?
Well, that's what I came onto the show for.
Okay, then let's do that. Because I don't want to get this into any animosity now between you and me. Just because I make a comparison, you will have to suck it up. You will have to just accept that there are some things here which are not always going to be your way. Okay, I'm sorry. I cannot do that. I'm trying best as I can. I don't insult. I don't do anything. I accept what you are. I accept you for what you are. I accept your views. I accept that you are contributing and doing a great job at that. And we have been through this many times. And I've explained to you that I'm never, ever going to pick on you. And I'm still sticking to that. And if you now are sensitive to things that I'm saying, I'm going to tell you now, I am not picking on you. I'm not saying that I am now making these comments because of you or anything like that. It's not that, okay?
But I'm not being sensitive. I'm just noticing the pattern. And I refrain from
There's no
making
pattern.
insults or slurs or comparisons to people who believe in evolution or atheists. Yeah, so I don't. I actually don't. I refrain. Anyway, let's move on. You've said what you've had to say. I've had to say what I've had to say. Let's move on then.
There's no pattern. All right. Okay. Here's the Quran for this week. Oh, I can make this bigger. Oh, geez, we've covered a lot of ground, eh?
Yeah, I'm on my mobile, so I won't be able to easily see that.
Can you see anything?
I can see something, yeah, but it's not. I'll try and make it a bit bigger. There we go. Yeah, I can make the screen a bit bigger.
Okay. Now, last week we said rule them in line with the Quran, follow the Quran, not the humans, and if they leave Islam, they will be punished. Do you want to be judged by ignorance or by a God? So this was in chapter 5, sentence 50. In sentence 51, it carries on in the Quran, don't befriend Christians and Jews. They have each other. Now, later on in 57, it will be who mock and ridicule your religion, but here it doesn't say that. And there is another sentence which says forbids you only from befriending those who fight you. But in this sentence here in 51, it does not say so. Here it's only don't befriend Christians and Jews. Thunder, are you following this on the Quranics as well?
I'm following it on the Yusuf Ali translation as
excellent.
as
Okay,
is my
brilliant.
default.
Okay, no, that's super. So if you see any discrepancy or if you find that there's anything that needs to be explained, because you were very good at this in the past, where you pick up things where you say, but hang on, we need to also mention this. And so please do. So it's good that you're doing that.
Sure. Just on this one, for starters, it says, "Oh, you believe, take not Jews and Christians for your friends and your protectors," which is interesting in 2 points. First of all, it says, "Do not take." So if you're working with a colleague who's a Muslim and they say your friend, they're actually disobedient. This by implication means they're being disobedient to the Quran and their Allah, because the Quran is quite clear: do not. And then you find a lot of Muslims through immigration are fleeing Muslim-controlled lands. They're not fleeing to other Muslim-controlled lands. They're fleeing to the Western Kuffar, which is predominantly in certain areas Christian or of another religion, seeking protection and asylum. So this verse, when you look at the world scene today, politically, ethnically, socially, the Islamic world totally contradicts this. So this is why, when you remember the conversation that you and I had a couple of years ago about when you said that you had friends that were Muslim, because your response to me was, it's that binary then, because they're not really your friends, and they can't be, because the Quran tells them not to be your friends. So all the Muslims that are listening to the show should not have friends that are anything other than Muslim, and all the non-Muslims that are listening to the show that think they have friends that are Muslim, well, they can't be your friends, because the Quran tells them that they can't be.
Okay.
I suppose the
And-
only thing that might happen, Thunderous, is that some Muslims either don't accept this verse or haven't read the Quran, very likely, and therefore will have friends anyway. So it could be that some of these Muslims are just ignorant of what the Quran says, or they've got some other interpretation, or they ignore it, or don't know about it. And that can also be the case. But like this one seems to be plain. I can't see the tafsirs here, so I don't know if you see there whether this is just a straightforward "don't befriend them" and stops the saying there, or whether there's some quote unquote context, because we love to hear the word context, don't we, when we bring a critique against Islam. So is there a context, I guess, is the
of course.
question.
Well, it depends if you're in the Western world. If you're in the Western world and a non-Muslim brings it up to a Muslim, then you'll get the word context. But if you're in a Muslim-controlled land, it is what it is. It's black and white and binary.
And Ahmed, Maverick, is no point in saying, yeah, it's allies. It doesn't matter. The point that I'm trying to make here, and what I think the point the Quran is trying to make here, is that stay away from Christians and Jews. It doesn't matter whether they're allies and whether they, I don't know. It doesn't matter whether they betrayed them or not. It's a clear command: don't befriend Christians and Jews. Okay, don't be friends with them. They are friends with each other, and this will get elaborated a bit more later on. And now picking on one word, I know you love that. That's just the only approach that you have, picking up one word which you think then changes everything. No, it does not.
And the thing is, though, just going back to this verse again, because you can have a whole show on this, but it says, do not take Jews and Christians as your friends. But the thing is, if the Muslim world actually truly applied that from the emergence of Islam, it would still be an area fenced off with ignorance, where the other side of the fence, which is Islamic or an Islamic controlled land, would be backwards and barbaric with no technology at all. Because they wouldn't have access to the technology we have, because they'd have to form some kind of alliance and friendship with us in order to alleviate themselves of the technology from the kuffar, the Christian, and the Jew. And the interesting thing is, it says, do not take protection from Christians and Jews. Well, where are they getting their arms from? They are basically the biggest purchaser of weapons at the moment in the world, on the world scene. Seems a bit of a contradiction there.
Of course, and this is why I'm saying to Ahmed, it's no point in changing one single word. We are showing every single week, every single slab that we are taking of the Quran, it's a man-made book. And that's the way that it is. There are hypocrites in 52, 53. There are hypocrites. It's worded a little bit differently, but to me it's the same thing. Number 4, apostates will be replaced with believers. Now, how that works is not really clear. It doesn't say we need to kill the apostates, but apostates will be made, to disappear, and they will be replaced with believers. I don't understand why a God who creates people, Allah knows all things, all right? I don't know how many times you see this in the Quran. Allah is the knower of all things, knows all things, He sees all things, and so on. So He knew in advance when He created apostates that they will apostatize, they will leave Islam. So why create them, replace them with believers? Why not do this in the first place? And then punish the apostates for your own incompetence. Again, it's always the same thing. 55, your buddies are your buddies. Well, plus Allah and Muhammad. 56, and that's good for you. 57, don't befriend those who mock and ridicule. This is what the reference that I mentioned earlier. And here it's now specified that don't just don't take for friends Christians and Jews, but don't do that with those who mock and ridicule your religion. So this is softening it a bit. So if you're a
Did
Jew
you
or a
know?
Christian, it's okay.
Do you not think that this as well is also pointing to Muhammad, because at the time when he was revealing saying these things, that he was actually being mocked and criticized as himself? So it's kind of a very clever way of generalizing, but the context of this verse for me is actually warning the audience for himself,
Correct.
because
I
his
agree.
contemporaries
Yeah.
at the time, some of them would have been mocking him.
Yeah. So who mock and ridicule your religion and your prayer, what is your problem? So you're worse than non-believers who are monkeys and pigs. Now, the funny thing is, it doesn't say this, but this is the beginning where it's directing this more at the Jews now. Even though it doesn't say this, there's no explicit mention of Jews or something. It's just those who don't believe. But it's implicit, the Jews who don't believe. So there are good Jews, which are okay with Muhammad, and there are the bad Jews who are not, and those are the monkeys and pigs. And they are the hypocrites, and they are eating bad stuff. And why don't their own rabbis stop them? And they say that God's hands are limited, but they're not. Now, limited, it's in the Quran, it says they're tied together, but they're not, because God gave them not the good stuff, but hostility and hatred. So God's not always so good, is he? But 65, it's their own fault. And 66, again, it's their own fault.
Hang on a moment. That seems to be a contradiction. If God gives you something, do you have the ability not to accept it?
No.
In which case he couldn't give it to you. So that wouldn't be the case. So if he gives you something, it's not really that he's giving you, you are taking it whether you want it or not. And
Yes.
so it couldn't be your fault. So this whole gave them hostility. It's not as if he said, hey, would you like some hostility? Take it or leave it. It's a case of if he gives it, i.e. that's his will. Can you go against
No,
his
he
will? No, you
inserted
can't.
it.
Even if you have free will, his will overrides your will. Therefore, that doesn't work. So how could it be your fault? So that's plainly contradictory.
But
Just one of a
in the
million
Quran, it says
contradictions.
it's injected. It just appears there that you don't have a choice.
Well, if you don't have a choice, how can you be at fault? Right?
Rob, there's so many contradictions here.
Of course.
I mean, nearly every single sentence. I mean, wait for the following ones. There's a couple here which I pointed out because they are so blatant. So, or do you want to read first what it says in 64?
I don't have it with me. I can't see it at the moment.
Oh, okay. Thunder, do you have 64? Do you want to read it out loud?
Sure. The Jews say Allah's hand is tied up, but their hands tied up, and be they accursed for the blasphemy they utter. No, both. His hands are widely outstretched. He gives and spends of his bounty as he pleases, but the revelation comes to you from Allah increases in most of them their obstinate rebellion and blasphemy. Amongst them we have placed enmity and hatred till the day of judgment. Every time they kindle the fire of war, Allah doesn't extinguish it, but they ever strive to do mischief on earth, and Allah loves not those who do mischief. I mean, that just reads so discombobulated. It has no coherency in there.
Yeah.
I'm struggling to make sense of what it's trying to say, other than it's just some kind of word salad of insulting the Jews yet again.
I had a tough time because it's exactly what you're saying. It's jumbled. And this is why I came up with, they say God's hands are limited, but they're not. God gave them hostility and hatred. So he inserted it into them without them having a choice. But it's their own fault, because the next sentence says it's their own fault. Can you go to the next sentence?
If only the people of the book had believed and been righteous, we should indeed have blotted out their iniquities and admitted them to gardens of bliss.
Exactly. So it's their own fault.
Yeah.
Crazy.
But the interesting thing is, it's their own fault. But it says there, in halfway through 64, amongst them we have placed enmity and hatred. We have placed enmity and hatred. So how has Allah created the enmity and hatred? So he's the cause of the enmity and hatred. So if he's placed it there, then the enmity that exists is the enmity that he himself has created.
Yeah, and even if you got free will, you can't resist that, can you?
No.
But that would make
Absolutely.
it, yeah, then it would mean that he couldn't place it there. Or if he did, it would be ineffective. And that doesn't seem to be the case.
And 66 again repeats the same thing. It's their own fault. Now, 67 is, I mean, come on. If you want to have a laugh, go and read 67. Because it says, messenger, deliver the message. And if you don't, you didn't.
A trivially true tautology. Nice.
Really, that's what it says. And then it says, God will protect you. Yeah, but hang on, it didn't. Because God says, I will protect you from everything, but he didn't, because he was poisoned. So how can the messenger deliver the message when God doesn't protect them?
An apologist Muslim will tell you, but hang on, he did protect Allah until his time, and that was his time, and God allowed that to happen. So you're completely wrong, Stops.
But the thing is, though, sorry, have you done 68 yet?
No, that's the next one.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, the next one is 68. Christians and Jews need to obey their texts and the Quran. And it says that. Okay, I'm not making this up. It really says they need to go and obey the Torah and the Injil and this revelation, which will increase their obstinate rebellion and disbelief. I mean, that's what the Quran says.
The thing is, though, right, it says, the people of the book, you have no ground to stand there upon unless you stand fast by the law, the gospel, and all the revelation that has come to you from your Lord. It is the revelation that comes to you from your Lord that increases in most of them their obstinate rebellion and blasphemy. So the law that God said is created rebellion.
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
It's almost like, really? But the thing that was one, but we've already picked up on that now. But the second thing I thought was, well, if Allah sent 123,999 prophets before Muhammad came along, now there's 1.2 billion Hindus. Now, by implication, that would be a religion from one of these, or two of these, or 10 of these, or 4,000 of these prophets that Allah sent to India. But the message, as obviously in Islamic default, got corrupted and bastardized, so it ended up being Hinduism. What I don't understand is why the Jews at the moment, I think there are about 30 million worldwide. Why is the Quran, which is supposed to be for time indefinite, an everlasting message for all mankind, seems to be addressing most of the time, when it's addressing an audience, say 70% of the time is addressing about 30 million people today, yet there's 1.2 billion not addressed. But Allah is supposed to have sent a message to them as well. So why is Hinduism and any of the other religions that are greater than Judaism not being mentioned in the Quran?
Well, so what does that? They weren't as big back then. And they probably were sent a message. Again, your Muslim apologist might send a messenger or messengers, and they didn't take heed. And so they've grown their own religion in opposition. And this is, again, a big test from Allah. That's what a Muslim might say.
In reality, it's because they were further away. They didn't care about it.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, he probably would never have known that these other religions existed, hence why they're not addressed in the Quran.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
But the funny thing is that it's the revelation which creates an obstinate rebellion and disbelief.
Yeah.
Come on. So thank you, Quran. You are your worst enemy. Let me tell you. I've never picked up on this sentence before. It's only that I had a real problem understanding it to bring it down, because in order to bring it down, you need to get to the essence, the core of the message, and this is what helped me pick this up. So it's a very good exercise for me too. So don't feel sorry for non-believers. Okay, so you are creating non-believers with your message, and then you say, don't feel sorry for them. But in 69, then it says Jews, Sabians, nobody knows who the fuck the Sabians are, and the Christians don't need to be afraid because they believe in the last day, the eschatology fairy tale. This is quite strange. And yet it threatens the Jews and the Christians all the time, and then says, well, they don't need to be afraid.
What are they not afraid of? What does the Tafsir say they're not afraid of?
The end times.
But if they're going to be judged and they are not, because essentially I guess in a sense they're non-believers, or at least they don't believe in the Quran, right? So in that sense they would be a non-believer. Not that they don't believe in God, but they don't believe in the Quran. And if you shouldn't feel sorry, and if they're going to be, judged, why would they not be afraid if there is an end times and they believe in that? Why would they not be afraid? So if Islam is true, if it were the case that Islam is true, then everybody who's not a Muslim should be afraid, unless it's
Yeah,
the case
normally,
that
yes.
in fact
Yeah.
you're going to be judged, positively, in which case you would have no fear then. So yeah, it doesn't really make sense, as usual.
Okay, and sent to 70 Jews got a contract, as usual, this covenant, and many messengers whom they rejected or killed, which they didn't. Okay. 71.
Who's
again, the
many
Jews.
messengers? Just quickly, the Jews got a contract and many messengers. Were those genuine messages? Or are those some of the 123,000 that Thunderous is talking about, or what messengers are those?
Yeah. These are just some of the messengers, yeah.
Okay,
some of
and
them were sent to
presumably,
the Jews.
great. And so this thing is saying, well, they were sent these messengers and they rejected and killed them. It doesn't tell us who these messengers are, when they came, who killed
No.
them, or any other details. It's just a vague,
Nothing.
unsupported
But this-
claim.
Yeah.
Well, this is
Right.
because he can only go by the stories that he's heard. This is why, yet again, time and again, when you're like, it's like the thing we just talked about, like the last day. There's no detail about the last day. He's just picked up a word or a phrase that he's got from the Jews and the Christians, that they all, both of them, accept that there's going to be a judgment day, so to speak. He doesn't know what it's relating to or what it's about, but he knows the phrase. He's heard it enough, judgment day, which is why in Islamic parlance you don't get any detail as to what it means, why it is, and what's going to happen during that period of time. In the same way with this, like with the contract or the covenant, he doesn't know what the covenant is or the contract is. He doesn't give no details as to what it's about. He just knows it's a phrase and something that's
He's
bounded
picked up
around
somewhere,
in.
yeah.
Yes.
And-
So he repeats, but you never get detail.
Yeah. And also Muslims don't know who's actually going to go to heaven. Even if they are a Muslim, they're not guaranteed to heaven. Even if they do good deeds, etc., they still don't know if they're going. And again, maybe this varies by different Muslims. They don't even know whether non-Muslims are going to heaven or not, or going to hell or not, right?
That's
So
also
this is
dubious,
all just
yeah.
a big crapshoot, and they are trying to put the probability. It's like going to the table and slipping a card under your sleeve or having a dice, but you don't actually know if it's going to land on the numbers you need. But if you bring enough dice, maybe the probability is higher or something like that, right?
But they don't know, but they've just had a Quranic verse revealed to them: do not take Jews and Christians as your friends. Do you see what I mean? Don't take Jews and Christians as your friends, but you never know. You might bump into them in heaven.
Yeah, it's
And finally, sentence number 71, this is another jewel. The Jews thought they would not be tested, and so they went blind and deaf. God restored them, and then they went blind and deaf again.
how did he restore them? What did he do to restore them?
It doesn't say.
And what did they go blind and deaf from, or in virtue of what?
No,
The Quran,
this is
or
just what it says. This is the
Yeah.
Quran says, listen, they thought we're not going to get tested, so we can go blind and deaf. We don't need to see and listen to anything. We will not be tested.
okay, so maybe that's what it is, right? So not listening to Muhammad is what's referred to as blind and deaf,
Yes,
potentially, right?
correct.
So the last messenger, in other words, right?
Yeah. And then God restored them, and they went blind and deaf again.
Right. So he sent the last messenger. In other words, they didn't want to listen, aka they went blind and deaf again, right?
So it's their own fault. This is so stupid. Anyway, by the way, I'm reading in the in the chat. The thing is that Aaron Ra had a series, and he actually got somebody who speaks Arabic, but he didn't know apologetics, so he was sitting there totally helpless. Now, Aaron Ra has spoken about Islam, and I contacted him. Remember, I used to be a lot on the Magic Sandwicher, and I said to him, "Listen, can I give you a shot on the arm on Islam so that you don't, make egregious mistakes the way that you are making now?" And he says, "Oh yeah, okay." And it turns out that he has become incredibly arrogant. Now, he thinks that he is now the one that he actually said to me, "Well, you should know where I am at what time so that we can sit together." I said, "No, no, no, how should I know that?" He says, "Well, I've got it on my blog." So he automatically thinks that everybody on this planet is now reading his blog. I said, I'm not looking at your blog. I'm not interested in what you are saying. You're making some good points, but I'm not following you. I'm not reading, every word that leaves your lips or leaves your pen or something. No. Yeah, okay. Then he was like really annoyed with me that I was not following him. And he says, "Yeah, let's do this next time, blah, blah," and it never happened. Then I said, "Well, we can get together and we can have a chat." And he said he was very dismissive. So yeah, he thinks that he knows everything, even if he doesn't. And so I'm not running after him. If he doesn't want it, well, okay, that's cool. I don't have a problem with that. Anyway. So this is just the explanation of why there is no collaboration between Aaron Ra and us. One thing I forgot in the news, and this is now in the Quran. I don't know if people have seen this, that there is a girl in, I think it's Algeria, who has come up with a Surah Corona, and she is now like totally threatened because people are sending death threats. Her Facebook account has been closed. It's horrible what is happening to her.
Peaceful people,
She
right?
came up with this surah, which is covered by the eradicating virus, but they were surprised that it came to them from China, far away. So the infidels, the kafirun, said it was a stubborn disease. No, rather, it is certain death. There is no difference today between the kings and the slaves. So hold on to science and abandon traditions. Don't go out to buy wheat and stay home, for it is a strong scourge. And wash your hands with new soap. Almighty Jilu, that is her name, has provided this truth. Now, apparently, if you take this into Arabic, it sounds a little bit like the Quran. And she says she doesn't know what all the fuss is about. Just because she puts in sentence numbers the way that it is done in the Quran, she doesn't understand what all the fuss is about. There's nothing here about a God. There's nothing here about the Quran. There's nothing here about Islam. There's nothing here at all. So why is it that Muslims are threatening her with killing her? That she is under investigation by the authorities in the country now, that they want to lock her up and punish her for this. What the hell is going on? And
Because
this,
it's been several years. It's been several years that the Muslim world have not had some kind of uproar where someone's done a cartoon or mocked Islam or said something bad about Muhammad. It's been too long, so they've had to find somebody, and now they've found their target.
this is crazy. This is just a, you know, a sort of a poem, but nothing fundamentally dangerous or anything like that. So I don't understand what the hell the story is. Anyway,
I think maybe it sounded so much like the Quran that when somebody read the producer surah like it, they heard that, they read it, they meditated on it, they couldn't tell the difference. So that's why she had to be executed. I mean, Satan did it with Muhammad, and Muhammad couldn't tell a difference. Muhammad's audience couldn't tell a difference. People have been doing it for centuries. Now a woman that's only got half the intelligence of man has produced a surah like it. What are you expecting from the Muslims to do? Off with their head.
Just by the way, there's a comment in the chat there. This shows basically a shitty echo chamber. Why don't you guys get some real firepower from the Islamic side to clash against and utterly destroy them with the same snobbiness you have on display? Well, we'd like
you're
to get
joking.
people. Well, firstly, I'm not sure there's such a thing as real firepower. But if you mean actual Muslims that can attempt to give a substantial answer, we can't seem to find them. They have their own echo chamber. Stops goes on there. He texts them. He tries to speak to them, and he gets muted or kicked or blocked or whatever the case is. So, by all means, deeds. If you know any Muslims, we'd be
I
happy to
found
have
it.
them. We'll invite them on.
This show
But
is
we
basically
can't
a
find them.
shitty echo chamber. Why don't you guys get some
Uh,
real firepower from the Islamic side to clash against and utterly destroy them with some slobbiness you have on display? Okay, bring, please, oh please, pretty, please. Oh, with cherry ice cream on top, please.
Can you
Please
hear me?
bring
Am I coming
somebody.
through? Okay, yeah, I am. Okay.
The
I've
reason
asked
why,
so
the
many
reason
people. I've asked the last guy I asked was Farid, okay, because he was the one who was criticizing was it Apostate Prophet, and I said to him, well, come on. I mean, he's immediately deleting my comments, but obviously he sees them, and I said to him, well, come talk to us. Nothing. We had Jordan who actually he challenged us and said, I challenge you. Let's go and sit together. We said, okay. And the moment we said, okay, he's been running. So what is the point
thing
of coming
is,
to us and saying, get somebody with some real firepower? Now, why are you, if you are somebody who can give us some uphill, why don't you come on the show? Why do you
No, I
need
don't
to
think he
hide
is. I
behind
don't think he's
somebody
a
else?
Muslim. I don't think he's a Muslim,
I, I,
Stops.
think, I think I think the problem is with the Muslims coming on the show is that every time that a Muslim does have, say, a discussion with non-Muslims or ex-Muslims on the show, and it's recorded. The problem is it's recorded, and when it's recorded, they become accountable for what's come out their mouths. If you've been watching, like and David Wood and Adnan Rashid, for instance, they've totally destroyed everything that comes out of his mouth. The same thing has happened with Muhammad Hijab, and so on and so forth. So when you start having a conversation with a Muslim and it's recorded, they end up looking wanting, and that's where the fear is. That's why the Muslim world, 1.6 billion human beings, and there's probably about 20 debaters in the whole world from the religion that's supposed to be true,
Yeah.
and not one of them now wants to come on a show and be recorded, because what happens is they themselves a whole time and again it's been seen now. Because going back to a phrase I have is that you can, the only way to defend a lie is to lie. Lies defend lies. Truth cannot defend a lie, and that's the problem. And I think they're smart enough to recognise that to defend Islam, you have to be dishonest. You can't defend it with truth, because Islam has no truth to defend it with.
But let me just make this very clear, because the point that you're making is absolutely correct. Because I've had Hamza sources. He was challenging me, and I said, okay. But then he realized he cannot handle truth. He cannot handle facts when all he has is the fakes. I've had Subur who said, yes, okay, I'll do this. I've had Imran Hussain who said, yes, I'll do it. There was another Indian guy on Aira who said, yeah, and then he ran. So all these people ran. I've had Hijab, I've had Ali, I've had everybody that you can imagine. The only guy who was desperate enough was Nadia Ahmed, and the only guy who was stupid enough was Kenny Boma. So this is it.
And,
But as soon as anybody else comes on, then no, they're too scared, it seems. And nowadays, I've quietened down so much. I'm like calmness itself.
Yeah, why don't we go on Muslim-dominated panels? Stops and I have been on Sir Faz's channel. EF Dawa won't let us on because that is truly an echo chamber where they all talk to themselves and pat themselves on the back. So where else do we go that's, quote, a Muslim-dominated panel? And why do we need to go on a Muslim-dominated panel? We could do that, of course, it's not a problem. But is it so that they can help each other, give each other a pat on the back and interrupt incessantly when they see their brethren? By the way, that happened on Sir Faz's channel, and the guy, and even the Muslims themselves said that their Muslim brother couldn't answer the questions, right? So they were saying how badly he did. So where is it that we're supposed to go? We invite people on here that can actually make claims. And Ahmed, you've attempted to do that, and it hasn't worked out. I mean, the inheritance error still remains unrefuted. You're still under the delusion that you have a counter to this. That's been rebutted. So at what point do we go, okay, you're not somebody that will take on an honest intellectual conversation, right? At some point we've got to go, okay, we've got to find somebody else. And we've had to dispense with others as well that really have no substance, that can't really argue rationally. So we're still looking for somebody like that.
No, the thing,
I
Marcus,
noticed the guys
Maverick X
accused us
has
of
been
being
on the panel. Maverick has been on the panel, but the thing is, we get sick and tired of this because all he does is he just changes words. So all of a sudden, an and means an or, and then that's it. So what is the point of arguing with somebody who, when you are trying to look at the Quran and you're trying to have a discussion about a specific topic, who then changes the words in front of you to mean something completely different? You cannot talk to somebody like this, and this is what Ahmed has done. This is why he still maintains that the inheritance error is wrong, because he has changed one word, and now this one word means that this one example that we came up with is not applicable, and therefore the Quran is right. It's not. He has not provided anything that is correct, but he is thinking that by sabotaging our argument, that ours that we have shown to be a mistake is incorrect. And he hasn't, and we have shown him this. But this is, it's a bit disingenuous. If people change words whenever it pleases them, it doesn't work like that. You need to be consistent. You can't just say, well, here I'm changing the word to mean something else so that your argument doesn't stick. So a slave is not a slave. What the right hands possesses, suddenly the word right is not right, it's left or center or whatever. It doesn't mean that. Now suddenly it means something else. But if you look at the contents, it's all there. So, this is
Right.
stupid. It's a bit
We're happy to
ridiculous
have
to talk to people.
Orthodox Moor on here. We've been on Valley's channel and had some back
Yeah.
and forth, not much, but we've
Yeah,
invited
but
him
I
on
had a nice
multiple times.
conversation with him. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are a few out there. Obviously, I don't think they've got convincing arguments, but they can at least have a conversation and follow along and be reasonably honest, right, in the sense that they're not trying to misinterpret or be uncharitable or whatever the case is. And
We
that's
had
easy to
Andalusi
pick up
here.
on.
We had Andalusi. He's
Did
been
you?
running. He was big mouth. He said, yeah, we're going to totally annihilate you. And what happened? Nothing.
Anyway, we could go through this all night.
Shabir Ali.
We've run on,
Zakir
right?
Naik.
You wanted to move on, didn't you? And we're
Yes,
over
and
an hour
I'm
in.
late already. Shit, and I wanted to be less than 1 hour. Yeah, me and my big mouth.
Yeah, we can talk about every single apologist, but that would be a show in and of itself.
Okay, no. Go to Asadullah Andalusi and say stop spamming. And you will see how he implodes. Because he is so shit scared that he can't handle anything from me. Okay, if you want to see a show, just try that.
He won't come on. No. Yeah, go
No,
ahead.
he's too afraid. The theme of the month is Quran versus reality. And last week we spoke about the reality as represented by science. And we saw that as soon as you apply science to the Quran, as soon as you go and anything that is claimed about reality, you can examine it through the eyes of science, and then it is false. This is what we saw last week. This week we're going to talk a little bit about morality. So the Islamic morality is multifaceted in itself. Okay, so if you are like born Muslim, what they say, born Muslim, you are indoctrinated since childhood. That's all it means. You're brainwashed. That's all it is. What you're supposed to be from a morality point of view. Now, morality is not something that exists as such. All right, it's not like a cactus or whatever. Morality is a man-made construct. It's like the it's like the manner, the character, the proper behavior that you should exhibit. So it's something that we are using where, and this is, thank you, Rob, for this, there's an objective side, which means it's always, it doesn't matter in what context, bad to torture a baby for pleasure. And it doesn't matter who you are, but I know that there are people who get pleasure out of this. But this is exactly why it is an objective quality that this is always wrong. But then you need to go to the subjective part, which means your individual morality is based on DNA, on the genes, on all sorts of things, because you have your personality and you have your character. Now, there are pieces of information which you get from the lifetime of your parents, on top of all the genetic information that is common to all human beings. And depending on this and depending on your individual experiences, there are things that you will produce or that you will display as proper behavior in your own character. Now, for a Muslim, there is one single God, which is the decider, the lawgiver, the perfect creator who knows what is right for his creation, and requiring the number one of all tasks, which is worship for exactly this creation. Now, there are positive aspects of Islam, which is not to go after money, not to go after power, not go after material wealth, but only this God that you need to fear, that will that promises you something once you're dead, or punishes you once you're dead. But it's good and bad simultaneously, because the true and sincere faith that you must have also stops you from applying what Rob mentioned earlier on, and that is critical thinking. And for the individual Muslim, the positive side is that you should be pious, that you should show humility, and you're only accountable to God, which means that actually Muslims should show a very quiet and project a very quiet demeanor, very humble and everything. It's a pity that they don't follow what is preached. And you should not go for vanity, narcissism, self-love, complacency. You should be mindful and kind, but unfortunately mostly to other Muslims. And then, of course, you have this thing with charity, which is a double-edged sword, because if it's obligatory, if it's a law, if it's a command, it's not charity. So there are other aspects. I want to ask Rob, can you just, because you have a very interesting outlook on what morality is, what it is based on, how you do this. What do you think about this?
So my view as an atheist, I've been persuaded that the initial starting point, rather than calling it objective or subjective, I mean, I'm quite happy to use the word subjective, and thanks to TDS Dave, he and I have had a number of conversations on it. But I think objective and subjective get you stuck in the weeds. Most Muslims I speak to don't really know the difference, and they will claim objectivity without really understanding much about it. My view is that once we accept a starting point, for me, it's the well-being of conscious creatures. Once we accept that that's the goal, and that morality entails that's the goal of morality. So when we say something is good and bad in relation to what? Well-being of conscious creatures, or humans, if we're talking about us in particular. Once we have that, then we need to employ some methodology to find out what's the difference. How do we find out the difference between what is good and bad? So we now have something that we can measure good and bad against. How do we do the measuring? And there I would employ reason and science and bring in empathy as necessary. And I think with those tools, then we have something that I can challenge anybody else on, in particular Muslims, and go, okay, let's compare moral systems. What is your standard? What is it when you say good and bad in relation to what? And typically they will say in relation to whatever God says. Now, it depends on the Muslim, right? If a Muslim is a divine command theorist, which is, hey, whatever God says is good, and whatever God says is bad, then they've got no way to ascertain whether it's in fact good or bad outside of what God says, in which case they're taking it on faith. And if they're going to claim that they have an innate fitra that tells them about God, then we have an innate sort of sense of morality, then, of course, that's kind of begging the question, in the sense that, hey, if you can't make a difference, and if God has given you something that matches whatever he says, then you've got zero way of finding out whether something is good or bad external. And if you're going to go with your own moral system, and you're going to find, and you're going to use some other standard, well, then you're not using God. And some people do that. It's more rare among Muslims. I've seen it in other groups, but certainly with Muslims, that's more rare. They will tend to go with whatever God says is good, and so forth. And then we compare and contrast. And sophisticated theists, both Christians and some Muslims, rare Muslims, but sophisticated theists will never deny that atheists have got morals. And the only critique they will have is, hey, well, it's subjective, or it can't be objective, or whatever the case is. And specifically when I'm speaking to Muslims, for example, I'm going to ask them, what do you mean by objective? Do you mean, is it independent of human opinion, or is it independent of humans entirely? Because those are two separate things. So independent of human opinion would be something like the earth goes around the sun. It doesn't matter what your opinion is about that statement. There is an objective fact, to the best of our ability, 99% chance that the earth goes around the sun. So effectively, we can, as a layperson, we can call that a fact that is so unlikely to change as to be, virtually set in stone, from a layman's point of view. Obviously, if you go down the philosophical route, almost nothing is guaranteed, but that's a rabbit hole that doesn't help anybody going down there. So it's not very useful to go down that philosophical route for most people. So that would be sort of an objective fact. I have changed my position a little bit pointing to Dave, etc., about that with regards to morality. Now, Sam Harris does make the argument for that, but I think in order for that to be the case, in order for it to be objective, you'd have to have a knockdown argument that the well-being of conscious creatures is what everybody must abide by. Now, I can put forward an argument why I think at base level that is in fact what everybody's talking about, even if it's from the Islamic God. Then ultimately, what's the difference between heaven and hell? It's in some level your well-being, because if I ask a Muslim, why would you rather go to heaven than hell, they will tell me some reasons. And those reasons will pertain, ultimately, if I ask them enough questions and they're honest enough, to the well-being of the soul, for example. So at least if there's a soul in the afterlife, then the soul is better off. What do we mean by better? The well-being of the soul is improved by being in heaven rather than in hell. So even in that system, I think ultimately it's about well-being. But am I confident enough that it's a philosophically knockdown argument? No, in which case I'm quite happy to use the word subjective. The problem when I do that is then it gets down to, oh, well, we as Muslims got objective, therefore we win. Well, no, that's not the case. Firstly, we need to demonstrate that it's objective. And even if I were to grant you that it's objective, rather than arbitrary, i.e. that your God has just made this stuff up and you don't have any other way to accept it, therefore you'll accept whatever he says, that's not objective. That's like, celestial North Korea type thing. He's telling you Muslims what to do, and you've got no way to say it. You've just got to accept that whatever he says is good. That's not objective. That's just a might makes right sort of approach. But even if I were to accept that, now you've still got to show me that it's good. Good in relation to what? Whatever he says? Well, that's a tautology, i.e., that's like a vicious circle. How do we establish that whatever he says is good? And if you're just going to tell me because he says so, then that's no good, right? So the Islamic claims of objective morality, I think, and I say it a lot to atheists and to people in general, right? If we're critiquing Islam, even Christians or anybody else, when we're critiquing Islam, they've got their version of objective morality, and I think we need to critique that more. I see sometimes atheists letting that go as if they've made a point. They haven't made a point. They've made a claim that we need to vehemently object to and challenge. And go, okay, let's have a look at what you mean by objective, and let's go see whether in fact it is objective and that it is objectively good, and how do you establish that, Mr. Muslim? And at that point, when I've had discussions, it gets into a dead end. All I need for people to accept my view on morality is that well-being is what we are talking about when we talk about morality, and then to accept that there must be some methodology to ascertain the difference between something that is good in relation to well-being and something that is bad. And if you accept that methodology of reason and science, now we've got something we can talk about. And now it will be the case that it doesn't matter what you say, Mr. Muslim. If it were the case, and I always use the example of the hijab, for example, if it were the case that we could show with science and reason that it was objectively better, given our starting point of well-being, that the hijab was better for women to wear, I would have to acknowledge it. We need all the scientific evidence, psychology, biology, sociology, all the disciplines put together, and we compare around the world women who are veiled versus women who are not. And if it were the case that we could, in some way, come up with an objective measurement for this where we could show that the hijab was better, I would have to acknowledge it, because I'm using that standard and it's applying to well-being. I think that is non-existent to be the case, but if it were, then I would have to accept it. So that would be one way that we could go about it. And that would then be independent of my opinion, whether I like it or not. That is the case. And the same for the Muslim. Otherwise, it's just a case of them accepting whatever God says. And I'm not going to accept that. I'm going to go, why should we accept what God says is good? If you say, and Muslims don't, by the way, they don't say God is all good, right? The Christians say that, and that's fine. We could chat to them about that. But I don't hear Muslims saying he's all good. They always say he's all merciful, all just, which is contradictory. You can't be all merciful and all just simultaneously at every moment. Because if you're all just, that means that you have to sacrifice mercy. And if you're all merciful, then you have to sacrifice justice. So those two are in conflict if you try to use them at the same time. So there's a lot of problems that I think we have when we speak to Muslims about this. And I think our view is a good one, and we can put it out in the world, test it, and see how well it works. The only problem I see is that if people come along with different starting points, i.e. what's the goal of morality, and their goal is markedly different to ours, and they can't accept that actually it's well-being. If somebody were to say, hey, I've got a different goal, and it turns out they had a good reason for saying that, and it didn't boil down to good the well-being of conscious creatures, which I would be very interested to hear if somebody had a substantive argument for that. Now we would have a problem, because now they would be, okay, it's good in relation to my goal. I'm saying it's good in relation to well-being. Now we would have a problem. But ultimately, I think everything does point down to well-being at the very base level. And so we can still have a discussion about what affects us as human beings in this world, or indeed, if you believe in the afterlife, how it might affect you in the afterlife. So I think with that view, I can put forth a morality. And why so religious? I know he's in the comments. He doesn't believe in morality. We had a discussion recently on Veli's channel around that. So with my view, I could say to why so, or anybody else, and by the way, he's an atheist, and we disagree, and atheists can do that. I can say, here's why, this is what I think is good, and here's the reasons why. So I can put forward a rational argument. He doesn't believe in morality, so for him to say anything to anybody else, he's got no legs to stand on. If he doesn't believe in morality, anything he says is his own personal opinion. Somebody else can come and say, well, I disagree, and that's my personal opinion, and he's got no chance. He can appeal to the law, which is what he does. Unfortunately, though, the law is based on people talking about morality. So the law it didn't just come in a vacuum. It came in relation to people talking about a moral system. So I think appealing to the law is the law is just built on top of what people think is moral. And the law is there to enforce whatever you think is moral. So appealing to the law is indirectly appealing to some version of morality. To say you don't have it, I think is problematic, and certainly shoots yourself in the foot. If you're going to critique anybody else, they're going to say to you, why should I care about what you think? If you say slavery is bad, that's just your personal opinion. And I might think that, enslaving people or keeping a woman in line or whatever the case is with a slight beating is okay. And who are you? You don't have morals. I'm just not going to listen to you. Whereas I can come to them and say, hey, if you accept this, this, and this, then I can show you why that is objectively wrong based on the system. You've got to buy into the system. But that's the case for everything, right? You've always got to buy into somebody's system. If they make a rational argument and you buy in, well, now you're in the system, and now you can really have a conversation. It's only when you've got vastly different systems and neither person's prepared to buy into the other, that's where you're going to have a moral disagreement that I don't think can be, go any further. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks, Tops, and thanks for listening, Thunderous.
But what is funny is that Deeds is asking exactly the questions that you just answered. So I don't quite understand. So
what was he saying? Sorry, I didn't see the chat.
Well, we have presuppositions, and so does the Muslim. Maybe the Muslim is right, but you just explained that. So
yeah, but it depends
how that works. I mean, yes, we do have presuppositions. We explained that. The point of the matter is, I can go with my set of morality, my moral standards, and I can say that I will condemn any man who performs any sexual act on a 9-year-old girl. Muslims can't do that. So I'm not saying that my presuppositions are supposed to be the basis for everybody else. I just think that for the well-being of society, it is better that we don't have old men fondling little girls sexually. And that is something that I find beneficial, and it should be beneficial for everybody if we go and we don't do that. Because 9-year-old girls can't defend themselves. They can't say, no, I don't want that, because they think that we are adults, and adults are always right, and this is where they get all the knowledge from in the first couple of years. So they will automatically go and fall in with this, even if they are, I don't know, disgusted or whatever you want to call that, but they will still do certain things because an adult is telling them. And that is why I can condemn this, and I don't think that I'm wrong. If you think this is correct, I don't know.
I think that I might slightly disagree with you. I don't know if you misspoke or I misheard you. I do think that my view is persuasive, and I think anybody that buys into it, I think every Muslim should buy into my view, and if they did, and we showed them what the problems were with the Quran, they would immediately see it and stop being Muslim, or at least not believe the Quran is a moral book. So my view, where I come from, is I would be saying to every Muslim, if you accept my rational argument, then you would buy into my system. And once you buy into my system, then I can show you why this is wrong. And I would want you to buy into my system. So I'm not shying away from it. I'm actively saying this is better. What do I mean by better? Increases well-being. If you want to use some other standard, by all means, tell me what it is, and let's see if it doesn't actually become well-being. And if it does become well-being, then you have actually bought into my system and you're just using a different path to get there. And then we can see whether that actually works. But I'm saying that every Muslim should buy into this. And if they did, A, they'd leave the Quran, and B, they'd be more moral people. So, and I'd actively want people to do that. And so I
Well,
wouldn't be saying, hey, just keep your thing and whatever. No, no, no. Buy into this system. I think this is superior to your system, and it will have a better result if the goal is the well-being of conscious creatures.
okay, that's what I thought I said. If I
Okay, cool,
didn't,
cool.
then and again, the question is, you can't tell the Muslim what system to buy into. Yes, I can. I can tell them to buy into a system where it is immoral to fondle 9-year-old girls. That's what I'm saying. I am telling the Muslim to buy into the system where it is immoral to have another human being as property. I am saying it is immoral, and it is definitely something that I hate, and that they have to accept that this is wrong, to beat women. And that's
Yeah, but
how
they don't
easy
though,
it
right?
is.
Yeah, they don't though, because obviously, A, the Quran says it, and B, if the Quran says it, then it must be a morally good act. And
Now,
so
let
then
me
the
go to,
question is, what do you mean by a morally good act? And if they just reply by whatever God says, then there's no way for them to ascertain. Then they're simply, the Muslims are then just taking it on faith, and there's not a lot we can do about that. We can appeal to it, we can expose it, and so forth, and let everybody else who's a non-Muslim sort of cringe at it. I think that's all we can do. But they're not going to be convinced. If they think that God has written it, then whatever we say is irrelevant in that sense, right? They would at least then be consistent with their book. It would still be, not a good position to be in. But I
yeah,
think a lot
they
of
can
them in the
admit it,
Western world
exactly. But they
won't
don't.
do that because their morals are better than their book. And so they're trying to find a way for their modern morals that actually kind of agree with us, but they want to find a way to square that with the Quran. And that's where it becomes extremely problematic for them.
Yeah. Let me step it up a notch. Now, I, I oppose incest, but I don't think that it should be criminalized. Now, a Muslim can't do either because it's built into the Quran, it's built into Islam. And now we have a totally different set of standards here. Because incest, the way that it is built into Islam, is that first cousin marriage is definitely allowed. It is not commanded, but it is not prohibited, which is why you have a substantial number of first cousin marriages in Islam, which is now showing up as genetic defects in babies. So here it is no longer just a moral standard. Here it is a medical, a factual standard, where I am saying it is wrong to practice incest if there is any kind of offspring. Now, I'm not saying if brother and sister have sex and they use condoms and nothing happens, that this is a great thing. I do not condone this. But there are no consequences, so it should not be criminalized. But if you go and you look at first cousin marriages, the way that they are performed in Islam, this has a detrimental outcome. This should be criminalized if it is practiced like this. This is the difference. This is where now morality clashes with medical facts. And this is where we start getting into a totally different realm in my eyes. Now, there is a lot of stuff in the Quran which says you can treat your sex slaves as sex slaves. You can have sex. And there, if we go into the hadith where people say, well, Muhammad is the moral, is the role model, is the idol of everybody. Well, I'm sorry, the way that he speaks about sex slaves is disgusting. And this is where morality comes in, where nobody can tell me. And this is Rob's point, and I totally agree with him. This is where Muslims today are realizing, oops, there is something wrong. We cannot have, war captives, female war captives, being raped, and the men doing it being told to enjoy their raping, that they can continue until the orgasm, they don't need to worry about it. And this is what Muhammad propagated. This is what the Islam of Muhammad is telling people. So you cannot come to me and say the morality, what God is saying to Muhammad is good, This is the argument that Rob just brought, and you accept it, and at the same time say, well, it's actually bad because you shouldn't have sex and you shouldn't rape with female war captives. So how do you get the two together? So what is happening is that Muslims today are better than their God. So they're saying, well, no, actually slavery is wrong, and now we need to get rid of slavery somehow in the Quran. Instead of just being honest and being consistent and saying, yes, there's slavery in the Quran. Yes, we need to scratch it out. Yes, it was revealed 1,000 years ago. It was commonplace in those days. It is wrong. It was always wrong, but it was practiced in those days. Let's be honest. Let's admit it. Let's just scratch it out. Let us
think that-
take all the things and just sort of, not just remove them and say it's still the Quran.
I think the problem with that stops is 90% of the Islamic problems will go away in terms of morality if they accept that Muhammad came and he made it slightly better in the 7th century, but it's not to be followed by today's standards. Then we wouldn't be having many of these things. We can still talk about whether it's true and the odd things here and there. But if they want to bring the 7th century morality to the 21st century, that's where there's a massive problem. And as you point out, this is where the apologetics kick in. Just a quick couple of things, because let's bring in Thaddeus and have a conversation as well. There will be a Discord after this as well where we can have the conversation. So Why So Religious says I'm speaking for his position. I think I've represented it accurately. I don't want to misrepresent anybody, but you're more than welcome, and everybody else is, to the Discord server after the show, and we could talk about morality. And Why So is an atheist. He doesn't believe in morality, and he also believes that abortion is wrong. So he's actually on the mostly on the theist side, because most theists I'm aware of are anti-abortion. So he's on that view, and that'll be a lively discussion. We had a long discussion on Valley's channel at one point. So that's part of the case. And then the fellow Deeds is saying, well, you can't argue, you can't reason against a starting point, aka fundamental basis or bedrock. Well, you can actually, and I'm inviting somebody to do that and to say, hey, Rob, morality does not involve the well-being of conscious creatures. It involves something else, and I'm going to put forward an argument. So they don't have to accept mine. I'm saying that they should, i.e. that it's prescriptive, i.e. that I'm giving a rational reason for it, and I think it's the best way to go. But I'm open to somebody else saying, no, I don't. What morality has got nothing at all to do with human well-being, either in this world or the next. And I have some other goal as to what morality is. I'm happy for somebody to do that. So they can actually argue with it. So I wouldn't say they can't argue with them. I'm putting it forward as a presupposition. That's true, but I'm not saying that it's irrefutable or that you can't argue against it. On the contrary, I'm looking for somebody to put forward some other goal, and we can talk about that and see how that works and whether, in fact, it involves any well-being. So no, that's not the case. But again, join us in the Discord server afterwards, because I think what Stops is going to do is now go to the Quran so we can look at some of these things. So
no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that.
Oh, you don't want to? Okay. Because even if you're a theist, right, and i.e. a non-Muslim like Thunderous, right, you can still look at the Quran and say, hey, I don't agree with this. Even if you believe in God, right, you can still critique the Quran. It's not as if all God believers are in the same basket. They are clearly not. And Thunderous can come from a position of, hey, I have an all-good God. Islam doesn't say their God is all good, and my all-good God says to me that these things in the Quran are wrong. So he can still have a basis that he could challenge, and I'm sure he will, things in the Quran. Now that I think is you can definitely have that position. I think where it's a challenge, though, is if you don't have morality or you don't believe that it is real. So like you're an anti-realist, i.e. that there is no such thing as morality being real, or that you don't believe morality exists, then I think, excuse me, all you're talking about is a personal opinion. And a Muslim then, in that case as well, I don't care about your opinion. Whereas for ourselves and even for Thunderous or anybody else, we can say, here's our justification for why we say it's wrong, and we can argue the point. I think it's much more difficult for Why So, but I'm sure if he's around and we invite him to come to the server at 10 o'clock UK time, he can then put that forward. Because the question I have for him is, if you say to a Muslim that whatever they are doing is distasteful or disagreeable to you, why should they care? And I think for the rest of us, we can put forward an argument why we think they should. Whether they will or not is a different story. But we can at least justify why we think they should care.
Yeah, but the best example is Maverick, who says, look, there's nothing wrong with this. let's carry on doing it, because if it's in the Quran, it must be okay. It's not called incest, he's on the labels. If it's not called incest, then we don't need to worry about it. So let's have first cousin marriages, let's continue having sex, let's continue having the babies, let's continue having genetic defects, instead of it being outlawed in the Quran. This is exactly the point. Thundra, sorry, what is your opinion on this?
On obviously I have an objective morality or moral course I pursue, but that's through my own deductions as to why I arrived at that place in the first place, to look at morality objectively. You have to bear in mind, though born Muslim, and when I left home, I left basically Islam because that was the only viable way of doing so. I did go through a period of my life where I actually was an atheist, and it was during that time that, you know, that's a discussion for another time. But I understand why atheists or evolutionists have a sense of morality, because from my perspective, it's part of the DNA of the human being. I think the Apostle Paul puts it in Romans, where there is no law, man does by law. I'll have to quote the scripture later on, but it's kind of like part of our DNA. It's part of the human being psyche that we have an inbuilt program of understanding what is right and what is wrong. I don't know if that was the answer you were looking for, but my perspective is that's why we have this conflict of discussion on morality, because it is a part of our psyche and a part of our makeup. It's the way that we've been designed.
Can I ask you, Thundrus, though, you can still critique the Islamic morality, can't you? And there's no inconsistency from your point of view by doing that.
Absolutely not. Yeah. I mean, but then I'll expect the Muslim to critique me as well, and I'll expect the Hindu to critique and the Jew to critique. You know, as far as morality is concerned, my perspective has always been that whatever religion you claim to be, by implication, you're part of that religion because you believe it's truth. That's your truth. That's what you believe as being reality. So whatever objective view or objective morality it holds to, you're going to argue that case because from your point of view, it's true. So the Muslim and the Sikh, the Hindu, the Jew, the Christian, the atheist, from their point of view, they're arguing from a perspective of what they perceive as being their reality. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think it's absolutely fine. And I think we're just pointing out different morality, different moral systems, or the lack thereof, right? So because I think there's a comment there that, go ahead.
Just from the point of view, right, an example that comes to mind is when the British were in India, and there's, I think it's called sati, where if the husband dies, the wife or the widow would throw herself on the funeral pyre and die, or kind of like a suicide. And the British put an end. The British rule in India put an end to that because the response was, well, I forget what it was, but we execute or something or other, those kind of like laws or rituals or cultural behavior patterns. So it put an end to widows in India throwing themselves on the funeral pyre when the husband died.
Yeah, I mean,
so there's an example of two moral outlooks based on theism, right? Because it would have been the perspective of Christianity that the English used over in India, because we're talking about the 1850s or somewhere like that, where an objective religious moral code was applied. So, yeah, there's a historical point where a discussion can be had from two moral points of view.
Yeah, and I think obviously part of the discussion tonight is on Islam's version of morality. Where does it come from? Is it objective? Is it good? And can we challenge it? And I think we those are all sort of part of what we're talking about. And there's many verses in the Quran that we can appeal to. And actually, as Stops pointed out as well, when we speak to certainly Muslims in the Western world, they agree a lot with us, right? In the sense that they think some of these things are problematic. But when it's in the book, now they have a problem, right? Unless you go the entire subjective route, I've spoken to one or two Muslims that think almost the entire Quran is subjective. You can interpret it any which way you wish. If you don't do that, if you let's just say more of a traditional Muslim that reads the Quran and takes it for what it's plainly saying, rather than trying to reinterpret and look at how you can find a different Arabic meaning for something, even though the multiple translations all point to the same thing. If you that sort of person, then I think you have a bit of difficulty. And of course, we've seen it in the Speaker's Corner. We've seen it with many Muslims that defend a straightforward view. I mean, all we need to point to, of course, is Muhammad himself. If Muhammad was alive today and he was debating with us here, he'd be in a lot of moral trouble for any country that has moved on from the 7th century. If you still have 7th century ideas, then of course they'd all appreciate that. But anywhere else, and if he was here with us, he would be in a lot of intellectual and moral trouble trying to defend those views. He might end up being the case, hey, I didn't actually say that the Quran wasn't, this recording wasn't my actual words. That would probably be where he'd ultimately end up going, which of course would be highly problematic for all of his followers. So Stops, where do you want to go from here? I know you might
I'd
be
like to go
responding
to a
in
different topic.
Okay. Again, we can talk
which
about this
is-
on Discord. This is a lively discussion that has gone on through the ages. So I think, you know, and YSO and others are there, and so we can have a discussion on Discord after this, or just after 10 o'clock, and I'm sure that'll go on for a few hours. Because I think oftentimes when I speak to Muslims, one of the biggest things is this whole thing on morality. I don't speak as much to Christians, so I'm thinking more about the Islamic view at the moment. And for them, one of the biggest things is, I hear it all the time in the comments from Muslims, hey, we've got this objective morality. And they infer that it's obviously a good objective morality, because if it was a bad one, that wouldn't be any good. And you guys don't, and therefore we win. And that whole discussion is worth having with Muslims, or indeed with non-Muslims as well, those that want to.
I think it's worth. Can I just add? It's worth bearing in mind when you're speaking to Muslims in Islam about morality, you have to ask, where did that argument originate? Did it originate with Muslims and the argument of morality, or have they kind of like copied another sort of like a discussion that had already been taking place, and they've kind of like hijacked that conversation? But what I mean is that conversation about morality has been going on between, say, atheists, evolutionists, and Christianity for 100 years already. Muslims have only just come in recent times and sort of like stepped into that equation. And then it's kind of like, hang on a minute here, when that conversation, see, with an atheist or evolutionist and say a Christian, you can have a good, enjoyable interchange of a discussion, a good dialogue going. Whereas with a Muslim, he doesn't have a basis for his morality, because the very things he's applying as to what is morality unfold on Islam in the first place, like, for instance, slavery, child abuse, or rape, as it is in Islamic parlance, violence, killing people who leave the religion. And so the very idea of morality that they use comes unstuck when you consider what kind of moral law that they're trying to advocate in the first place.
And I think they've borrowed a lot of the arguments, right? I think Christianity's been around longer. It's called more sophisticated arguments. And they've bought, at least the people I've spoken to have bought into those, don't really understand them very well, and then try to repeat them, be it whoever in Speaker's Corner or online. I've not seen a Muslim that really has a deep understanding of these arguments and being able to present them in a substantial way. I've seen Christians do that, and that is an interesting discussion, because they can go much more nuanced. The Muslims I've come across, and again, I mean, maybe there are intellectually gifted Muslims, I just haven't come across them, but the ones that I have, up to our era, including our era, they just don't really have a good understanding of this, or the nuance, or whatever the case is.
I mentioned that because Stops, I know I've spoken to Stops about this, and that was William Lane Craig being plagiarized by Hamza Zortzis. And I think Stops did a video on that, where the arguments, even word for word, and possibly even the gestures, were sort of like a direct blueprint of whatever William Lane Craig had laid out. Hamza Zortzis followed word for word and what he said.
Yeah,
and Adam Dean, all three of them, same thing.
So when I say that the groundwork had already been laid, the discussion of morality between, say, theism and, say, atheism has already been going on for 100 years before Islam came along and tried to get in on the scene.
Okay, one thing I'd like to point out now is something that is, in my eyes, one of the worst things in Islam, and that is the misogyny. Now, I've made a list here, and this is something just from the top of my head, all right? This is not something where I went through all the sentences in the Quran and I looked at them. No. So I know there is a similar list. Somebody has made it with the sentences from the Quran, but they were not quite accurate, so I'm not using that. I'm just using mine. I'm arguing this. This is my point. This is my claim. This is what I think is what is happening. Now, this is a mixture between what the Quran is saying and what is happening in real life. Okay, so this is not strictly only Quran. This is about Islam. This is Islam and the effect it has on life today. So a woman in Islam is seen as an object. Now, from a moral point of view, this is egregious. I mean, this is, I cannot express how terrible I find this is. We have the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which very clearly says that men and women have equal rights. There are biological differences, there are emotional differences, there are all sorts of differences, but we have the same rights. And that is what it's all about. And that is what is important. 40 years later, Islam came around and provided the Islamic Human Rights Declaration, 1990 in Cairo. And this is based on Sharia. And this is the huge difference, because there, not only does it say that Muslims are the better people, it also says that men are the better people compared to women. And this is why this is so terrible. This is happening today. Now, luckily, we have very few slaves left. I think there's something like the estimates are around 45, 50,000, which is 50,000 too many, all right? But on the other hand, we have a population of almost 4 billion women on this planet who, according to Islam, are a degree below a man. Why? Because the Quran says so. It's an absolute claim based on what the God says in the Quran, and this is why we need to believe it. Women are a degree below the man. They're supposed to inherit less. They're supposed to require double the number of witnesses in financial transactions. They're not supposed to do this and this is why I made this list. So a man is the caretaker of his wives. This is straight from the Quran. A man can marry 4 women, straight from the Quran. Can a woman marry 4 men? No. Why not? Well, then you don't know who the father is. Who the fuck cares? Why is the only argument that Muslims have, that apologists have, why a woman cannot have 4 men is because they don't know who the father is. Why is that the most important thing? Now you need to understand Islam to get to this. Because in Islam, a man is allowed to marry a non-Muslim woman because he is the one that determines what religion the child has. If a woman were to be allowed to marry a non-Muslim man, that man would then be allowed to indoctrinate the child with whatever religion he wanted and not the woman. And this is the rationale for a man being able to marry 4 women, but the women are not allowed to marry 4 men. This is 7th century thinking in the society of Arabia. A man does not need to be obedient to his wives, but the wives need to be obedient to the man. There's several sentences like this in the Quran. A man can beat his wife or his wives. And I'm not going to argue about what this word is or whatever, because people are now trying to tell me, well, it's not beat, it's beat lightly. It's even worse, because it shows you the disdain that the people have towards the woman, that she has to obey the husband. And if he wants, he can treat her like a little child and beat her even if it's only lightly. This is horrible. A man can have sex with his sex slaves. A man is not considered as chattel or cattle. A man inherits double what women inherit. Rationale again. Why? Well, the man has to take care of the family. The woman doesn't. The woman can spend it on makeup. This is how sexist Islam makes Muslim men. A man can open a bank account on his own. My wife had to call me. I had to come to the bank because I said to her, listen, just open a bank account and then this is something that we can use to transfer money. And she says, well, I'm here at the bank and they tell me that my husband needs to come here and open and sign this. And I asked the guy, well, What if a woman comes here without a husband? Well, then she can't open a bank account. Because in Islam, you can't do that. A man can be a single witness in financial matters. A woman can't. A man, and so on. A man can shake hands. A woman cannot. I mean, we see these stupid examples where a person, a female, goes to a Muslim and says hi, and can't shake hands. He gives her a flower or something, and then makes a move just to avoid shaking hands with a woman. A man can enter a mosque through the front entrance. A woman can't. A man can touch the Quran at any time of the month. The woman can't. A man can pray in a mosque any time of the month. The woman can't. A man does not need to cover the body excepting hands and face. Well, the woman has to. A man is not checked for virginity before marriage. A woman is. A man can be an imam. A man can leave the house without asking for permission. A man can go on Hajj alone without requiring a guardian. A man can have sex whenever he wishes. A man can have sex with underage girls. A man can be a muezzin. A man can leave the country without the spouse being notified. I received an SMS when my wife flew home. This is to inform you and so on. This is crazy. A man does not get flogged after he was raped. A man can get educated. In a lot of countries, I don't know if people actually know that like half the Muslims are illiterate. Because in some countries, 95% of the women are illiterate. This pulls down the whole average. So something like, I think it's no longer the majority. It's now only 55% which can read. But it's half. That's terrible. A man is not considered intellectually deficient. A man can divorce his wife at any time. A man is not required to bring 4 witnesses if he is raped. Okay, these are some of the things that I find totally immoral, because we're talking about 50% of the population. Now, what I would love to ask a Muslim, why is it that a man and a woman can't have the same job? And if they do have the same job, like if my wife is the captain of a jumbo jet and flies somebody to Dubai, and then the husband is the captain of a jumbo jet flying them back, should that be possible? And number 2, should they get the same salary? And I think it's absolutely yes. So why is that so difficult to get into the skull of some of these fundamentalist backward Muslims that this should be normal? Why is it that in a non-Muslim country, a woman can go to the ISS, and in Saudi Arabia, she's not even allowed to ride a bicycle in public? That's crazy. We need to stop this. This is immoral. So the morality that is absolute in the Quran, because the God says so, needs to be stopped. That's it.
I certainly agree with that, and I have a system to put that forward. So I think, like you say, if we go to Discord and there's any Muslims or indeed anywhere else that want to defend those sort of things, then by all means. And on what basis are they doing that?
Rob, look at the comments. Look at Ahmed. These things are not from the Quran. Does the Quran say anywhere that men and women are equal with equal rights? No, it does not. So why are you not able in the least to be honest enough to yourself and say, this is something we need to look at? Why can't you be honest just to that small extent?
Well, because I think they really believe it, right? That's why. So we're coming to the end of the show for the day, I guess. Hopefully we can invite people to Discord. But I agree, and I'm sure Thunderous does as well, that those things that you've read out in the Quran are scandalous by today's standards. What do we mean?
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Thunderous.
123,999 prophets of this, from Allah went out to all the world. Not one of them in any of the religions that we see in the world today has anything like that in their holy texts. What does that say about Islam?
Well, there weren't any other prophets doing that, right? That there
Well,
was
there
one guy in Arabia who's claimed to have done this, which again I think has challenged the veracity of even those historical claims that this guy existed in the way he says. But let's assume that he did, and that this book represents or reflects what he actually said and did. Then I think it's clear that he was a guy on his own doing this at that particular time. He probably never occurred to him that this would carry on, and I'm sure he would be. I don't know if he'd be overjoyed or whether his morality would have caught up with the 21st century and he'd be horrified. Who knows?
And Ahmed, remember, we were the ones who showed you how the grading of a hadith works, which is why you reject them. And now you turn around and you say, we don't even know that. But it doesn't matter. You see, this is what I don't understand. It doesn't matter whether or not we know the hadith or the Quran by heart or something. This is not the point. The point that we are making is in Islam, in Sharia, we have a situation that men and women are treated differently. We have a situation that slaves are not totally abolished. There is no command in the Quran anywhere, or in the hadith, or in the tertiary or whatever literature, that do not own another human being. This command does not exist. So if you go into all the morality claims, whether it is underage children, whether it is women, whether it is slavery, whether it is all the other inconsistencies and inadequacies that we see in Islam, they are all existent, and it doesn't matter whether you or somebody else wants to go and say, yeah, but this word is not there. Who the fuck cares? Why can't you be honest enough and say, yes, the Quran should say, do not own another human being? That's how easy it is. I mean, I don't know. Should we go into other examples? Because there's so much more that is immoral in the Quran.
Maybe keep it for next week, or I think we've got a lively
next
thing.
Week we have another topic.
Oh, okay, because we'll have a lively discussion possibly afterwards.
Because next week is going to be the treatment of non-believers.
Okay.
Well, don't treat them as your...
Sorry, say again?
I was saying, well, we've had a sample of that tonight. Don't treat them as your friends. that was a foreshadow for next week then, yeah?
But I can't... I mean, Thunderous, what would your minimum requirement or expectation be if you talk to a Muslim about morality? What would you like to hear from them, which is really minimalistic?
Really minimalistic? That's a hard one with a Muslim, because I don't think you can get anything that's really minimalistic with a Muslim. Everything that about Islam is diametrically opposed to other religions or common sense. So, and that's, I'll ask you the same question. What are you expecting that's at the very minimum for, in the sense of morality, from the religion of Islam?
I would like to see something like just be a decent human being. You know, because I said in the beginning, the positives, there are positives in Islam, which is a good start, but unfortunately, they are overshadowed with all the negatives. And if you are a decent person, what you need to do is you need to define the word decent, and you need to define it in a way that Rob has done in the beginning, which I think is the only way that you can do it. And then you go and you say, okay, base it on that. That is your basis. That is what I would want. It's such a small step, and it's such a tiny little thing, but it has such grave consequences.
The thing is to say with Islam, just going by what you said, several months ago we were doing chapter 2, I think it was, and I remember saying it at the time because I remember it, where the Quran describes a woman as a garment for the man and a man as a garment for the woman. And I remember saying that is actually quite a nice thing to say. I like that a woman sort of like glorifies the man. You know, she's beautiful, she's elegant, and it kind of like makes him feel proud in the same way a woman should feel proud about her husband in the way that she looks at him. That's a beautiful thing. But then Quran later on just goes and, you know, messes it all up by saying, go beat your wife. So it has that one moment where something gets said, then it totally contradicts it or ruins it later on, or gets abrogated. So this is why I can't find anything consistent with this. Where you say, well, is there anything in Islam, any morality that you can hold on to? and I can't find anything in Islam to hold on to because it just gets abrogated, ruined, or destroyed later on. And if the Quran doesn't do it, the Hadith does.
Yeah, that's a
That's
good
where
closing word. Yeah. Thumbs up, everybody, if you think that we should, whatever, improve Islam.
Well, improve it by
Oh
showing
boy.
people that it's not true. That's the best improvement you can ever do.
Say again?
is that
Improve
the
it by
Discord.
showing that it's not true. Right?
Is that TDS Dave? Is that the link to the Discord after chat?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll pop on there after this, which we're coming on 10 o'clock now, so stops however long you want to still run for, and then we can pop over there, I guess.
Yeah. Rob, closing words?
Yeah, I think it's clear that by most people's standards of morality, and even some Muslims, the Quran is an immoral book, if it's about well-being in any sense. And I think most people even see it intuitively, even the Muslims that want to claim they believe in God. They have a
That's a good
hard
point.
time
Yeah.
trying to accept it. Yeah.
Just something that came into my mind about morality. What the interesting thing is, historically and socially, nationally and internationally, wherever you go in the world, Jews, Sikhs, Hindus, Christians, atheists, tend to have a sense of morality that is common between them, that doesn't, if like, impose on the other. They have their own cultural beliefs, certainly, but their sense of morality does not impose on the other ones. Like the morality of an atheist doesn't impose on the morality of a Sikh. The Sikh likewise doesn't impose on the Jew doesn't impose on the Christian, so on and so forth. But wherever this vile disease of Islam goes, it imposes everywhere. There isn't a continent, there isn't a country, there isn't a community where Islam manifests itself that you don't have tension and schism, all based on Islam's sense of morality.
True.
That's a historical fact.
Okay. What is left to be done is just show you this, the hadith of the week. Very short one again, because I like it sweet and short. Narrated Abu Burda, my father said, I came to the Prophet and saw him carrying a siwak in his hand, cleaning his teeth, saying, as if he was retching, while the siwak was in his mouth. Now you can decide what kind of guidance this is going to give you. I don't know why Muhammad should be a role model if he is putting a stick in his mouth and says, I don't know what kind of guidance this gives you.
Sounds like some Quranic verses coming out of his mouth, but he had the tooth stick in his way, so he couldn't pronounce the words properly.
And if you are somebody who's watching and you know of any Muslims that want to join us in future, by all means invite them. We keep inviting Muslims. We don't get many takers, and the few that we do get very soon turn out to be completely ineffective and not good at arguing for Islam. So we're happy to have Muslims. In fact, we'd love to have them on. So if you know anybody, we keep asking. We don't seem to find them. So do ask on our behalf, invite them here. We're happy to have a conversation with them. And on that note, thank you very much, Stops. Thank you very much, Thundress. And from my side, we'll see you over on Discord.
Thank you very much for being with us on the show, and hope to see you on the Discord server where we continue talking about whatever you want. See you later. Bye.